The restaurant
Your
was
wine,
already
sir?
too loud when the glass shattered.
Enjoy your meal.
The Friday dinner rush packed every table. Voices layered over one another. Plates clattered. Wine poured. Elena moved quickly between the narrow aisles, balancing a tray of glasses against her shoulder. She had worked the floor long enough to navigate the chaos without thinking. Step left around the couple arguing near the bar. Slide behind the table of businessmen demanding more bread. Turn toward table 12 before the kitchen bell rang again. Everything moved in rhythm until it didn't. A hand grabbed her wrist. Elena gasped, the tray tipped. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like spreading blood. A glass slipped from her grip and shattered against the tile floor. The restaurant went quiet in a strange, uneven way. Not silent, but quieter. Enough that people turned their heads. The man who grabbed her wrist looked irritated, not apologetic. His expensive suit sleeve was stained with wine. Elena pulled her hand back quickly. "I'm so sorry," she started. But the manager was already storming across the floor. Chair legs scraped as he pushed through the aisle. His face was flushed with anger, the veins in his neck standing out before he even spoke. "What the hell did you just do?" he shouted. Elena felt every pair of eyes in the room lock onto her. Her heartbeat climbed into her throat. "He grabbed my wrist." The tray slipped. "I don't care what happened." The manager's voice grew louder. "Look at this mess." Broken glass glittered across the floor. The red wine soaked deeper into the linen cloth. The customer stood slowly, examining the stain on his sleeve like it personally offended him. Elena swallowed. "I can fix it. Give me 2 minutes." But the manager wasn't listening. He turned toward the entire dining room as if performing for an audience. "This is what happens when people hire incompetence," he snapped. Elena's stomach dropped. She had seen this mood before. It never ended well. "You've been screwing up all week," he continued. "Late orders, slow service, and now this." Elena opened her mouth to defend herself. Nothing came out. She knew what this job meant. Rent, electricity, food. Losing it wasn't an inconvenience. It was a disaster. Someone at a nearby table lifted a phone. The screen glowed bright in the dim restaurant. Recording. Other customers followed. The humiliation spread faster than the spilled wine. The manager pointed toward the door. "You're fired," he shouted. "Right now. Get out." The words echoed across the room. Elena felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet. 3 years of shifts, double weekends, covering for co-workers, staying late when everyone else went home, gone in one sentence. She bent down automatically to pick up the broken glass, but the manager kicked the dustpan away from her hand. "I said get out." The restaurant had fully stopped now. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Even the kitchen noise behind the swinging doors faded. People watched the scene like it was part of the entertainment. Elena stood slowly. Her hands trembled slightly. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry here. Not in front of everyone. Not in front of the phone cameras. She turned toward the back hallway where the staff lockers were. But then something shifted. A chair scraped against the floor, not loud, but heavy. The kind of sound that carried authority without effort. Elena glanced toward the corner of the dining room. A man sat alone at table 7, had been there the whole night. Dark suit, black shirt, no tie. His plate of food untouched in front of him. She recognized him instantly. Everyone in the city did. Viktor Volkov. He moved slowly, deliberately. First the napkin folded beside the plate. Then the fork placed down with careful precision. When he stood, the atmosphere of the entire room changed. It wasn't fear exactly. It was awareness. Like everyone suddenly remembered gravity existed. The manager noticed too. His anger faltered for half a second. Viktor walked toward him through the dining room. Not fast. Not aggressive. But people leaned back automatically as he passed. Clearing space, the manager tried to recover his confidence. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Viktor stopped 3 feet away. His expression was calm. Almost bored, he glanced briefly at the broken glass on the floor. Then at Elena. Then back at the manager. "You're firing the wrong person," Viktor said quietly. The manager scoffed. "Mind your business." The room held its breath. Victor's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. Something colder. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone and dialed one number. The call lasted less than 10 seconds. "Bring the paperwork," he said calmly. Then he ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The manager frowned. "What are you doing?" Victor looked around the restaurant slowly. His gaze passed over the stunned diners, the glowing phone cameras, the spilled wine, the trembling waitress standing near the hallway. Then he looked back at the manager and smirked. The manager laughed. It came out louder than it needed to, sharp and forced, like someone trying to push away a problem before it became real. "You've got to be kidding," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "You think you can just walk in here and tell me how to run my restaurant?" Victor didn't answer immediately. He simply watched the man with the same quiet patience he had shown since standing up from the corner table. The silence stretched longer than the manager expected. Long enough for the nervous laughter to fade. Long enough for people to notice that Victor wasn't joking. Elena stood near the hallway leading to the staff lockers, her back pressed lightly against the wall. Her heart was still racing from the humiliation, but now a different tension crept through the room. Customers leaned forward in their seats. The phones recording earlier hadn't lowered. If anything, more had appeared. The manager folded his arms. "Look, whatever you think this is, it's not happening. You're a customer. Finish your meal or leave." Victor tilted his head slightly, as if considering the suggestion. Then he looked toward the front entrance. The door opened before he said another word. 2 men stepped inside. Both wore dark suits that looked expensive even under the restaurant's dim lighting. One carried a slim leather briefcase. The other held a phone to his ear as he scanned the room quickly before walking toward Victor. The manager frowned. "What is this?" The men didn't answer him. They stopped beside Victor. The man with the briefcase placed it on the nearest table and opened it. Inside were neatly stacked folders and documents clipped with legal tabs. The restaurant murmured with confused whispers. "Lawyers," someone said quietly from another table. The manager's confidence cracked just slightly. "You can't conduct business in the middle of my dining room." Victor finally spoke again. His voice stayed low, but the calm certainty behind it cut through the noise. "Call the owner." The manager blinked. "What?" "Call the owner," Victor repeated. "Tell him Viktor Volkov is making an offer for this place." The manager stared at him. Then he laughed again, though the sound lacked the earlier arrogance. "The owner isn't selling." Victor shrugged slightly. "That's between you and your phone." For a moment the manager didn't move. But the attention of the entire restaurant was now focused on him. And Viktor Volkov stood only a few feet away watching him without blinking. Slowly, reluctantly, the manager reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He stepped away toward the bar area, speaking quickly into the receiver. Elena couldn't hear the words clearly, but she could see the shift in his expression as the conversation continued. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something closer to fear. The door opened again 10 minutes later. This time an older man rushed inside, still pulling a jacket over his shoulders. His hair was gray, his face flushed from moving too quickly. He looked around the dining room before locking eyes with Victor. "Mr. Volkov," he said breathlessly. Victor nodded once. "You came quickly. Your message sounded urgent." The older man glanced nervously toward the lawyers already spreading papers across the table. "My nephew said you were making an offer." Victor gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "Sit." The owner hesitated only a moment before obeying. The lawyers slid documents toward him, speaking quietly while pointing to specific lines. Numbers were discussed. Percentages. Terms. The entire negotiation unfolded right there between the dinner tables, as if the restaurant had temporarily turned into a boardroom. Elena barely breathed. Customers whispered behind their hands. Some leaned closer, trying to hear the details. The manager stood near the bar, his face growing paler with every passing minute. 15 minutes later, The owner leaned back in his chair and exhaled heavily. He picked up the pen offered by one of the lawyers and signed the final page. The scratching sound of ink on paper echoed strangely loud in the quiet restaurant. The lawyer collected the documents and closed the briefcase with a soft click. Victor stood again. The manager's eyes widened slightly. Victor walked toward him with the same calm stride as before. No hurry. No visible anger. Just inevitability. When he reached him, Victor pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder the lawyer handed him. He held it out. "You're fired," Victor said. The manager didn't take the paper at first. His mouth opened but no sound came out. The authority he carried minutes earlier had evaporated. Finally he snatched the document and stared at it, his face draining of color as he read the termination notice. Victor turned away before the man could respond. His attention shifted toward Elena. She hadn't moved from the wall near the hallway. Her mind still struggled to process what had just happened. Victor walked toward her slowly. The entire restaurant followed the movement with their eyes. He stopped a few feet away. "You still have your job," he said simply. Elena blinked. The words didn't land the way he expected. Instead of relief, something harder flashed across her face. Her shoulders straightened. She stepped away from the wall and shook her head. No, the restaurant went silent again. Victor's eyebrow lifted slightly. Elena met his gaze directly. "I don't work for you." The word hung in the air longer than anyone expected. No, for a moment the restaurant didn't react. The kitchen was silent. The customers were frozen mid-bite. Even the manager, still gripping the termination paper in his trembling hand, stopped moving. Elena didn't look away from Victor. She stood straighter now, the embarrassment from earlier still burning in her chest but slowly transforming into something harder. Anger. Pride. Maybe both. "I don't work for Mafia bosses," she said. The words were clear, loud enough for every person in the dining room to hear. A murmur rolled through the restaurant. Someone whispered, "Did she just say that?" Phones lifted higher. Victor didn't respond immediately. He simply watched her, the quiet man from table 7, the one who had just purchased the entire restaurant as if it were an afterthought, now studied the waitress who had refused him. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Maybe longer. Elena could feel the weight of his attention but refused to lower her eyes. If he expected fear, she wouldn't give it to him. The silence stretched. The manager suddenly barked a bitter laugh from near the bar. "You're insane," he muttered toward Elena. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" She didn't answer him. Victor's lips moved slightly. Then, to the surprise of everyone in the room, he laughed. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was soft. Almost amused, he looked down briefly, shaking his head once before meeting Elena's eyes again. "Good," Victor said quietly. The room tensed again. Elena frowned slightly. "Good." Victor nodded. "I don't trust people who say yes too quickly." Several customers exchanged confused looks. That wasn't the reaction anyone expected. Elena crossed her arms instinctively. "Then we're both happy." Victor's eyes sharpened just slightly. Not anger. Interest. The manager suddenly slammed the termination notice onto the bar counter. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his voice rising again. "You think buying the building makes you king of the city?" Victor didn't even turn toward him. But the manager wasn't finished. Humiliation burned through his voice now. "You're going to regret this," he continued. "You have no idea what you just stepped into." That made Victor glance over his shoulder. The manager's eyes were filled with something darker than anger. It was desperation. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the bar stool and shoved his arms through the sleeves. "Enjoy your restaurant," he spat. "While it lasts." Then he stormed toward the exit. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the glass windows. For a moment the restaurant stayed silent again. Then the conversations returned, quieter than before. People leaned together whispering theories. Elena exhaled slowly, only now realizing how tense her body had been. The night should have ended there. But outside, across the street, the fired manager stood beneath the yellow glow of a street lamp. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. He dialed one. Numbered IT rang twice before someone answered. Yeah, the manager said quickly. It's me. A pause that he glanced back toward the restaurant windows. You remember Viktor Volkov? Another pause, this time shorter. He just bought my restaurant. He listened again. The voice on the other end said something that made the manager's expression darken. Yeah, he said quietly. That's what I thought. He lowered his voice even further. He's inside right now. A car rolled slowly past on the wet street. The manager turned his back to the restaurant and continued speaking. No, he said after another pause. But there's a girl. The person on the other end spoke again, longer this time. The manager nodded slowly. Yeah, she's still inside with him. He listened one final time. Then he said something that changed the night forever. Good. I'll text you the address. The call ended. Inside the restaurant, Elena moved toward the hallway again, determined to collect her things and leave before the night could become even stranger. But Viktor's voice stopped her. Elena. She turned back. He shouldn't know her name, yet somehow he did. What? She asked. Viktor stepped closer now, his expression no longer amused. Something colder had settled into his eyes. You should stay here tonight. Elena frowned. Why? Before Viktor could answer, one of the lawyers approached him quickly. The man leaned close and whispered something in Russian. Viktor's face didn't change, but the air around him seemed to shift. Elena felt it instantly. The lawyer stepped back. Viktor reached into his pocket again and checked his phone. The screen glowed briefly before he locked it and slid it away. Elena watched him carefully. What happened? She asked. Viktor looked toward the restaurant windows. Then toward the front door where the fired manager had disappeared. Finally his gaze returned to Elena. Someone just put a price on my head, he said calmly. The words made the room feel smaller. Elena's stomach tightened. And, Viktor added quietly, because you're standing next to me, they now know your face too. He paused for a moment before finishing the sentence. Which means you're already part of the problem. The words stayed in Elena's head long after Viktor said them. Someone just put a price on my head. She stared at him, trying to decide if he was joking. His face made it clear he wasn't. The restaurant had started moving again around them. Plates clinked. Conversations restarted in low voices. But the atmosphere had changed. People were leaving faster now, whispering to each other as they passed the door. Elena folded her arms tighter. That has nothing to do with me. Viktor studied her quietly. It does now. No, she shook her head firmly. It doesn't. Whatever problem you have with whoever wants you dead is not my problem. One of Viktor's men stepped closer to him, whispering something quickly. Viktor nodded once, then turned his attention back to Elena. You're leaving? He asked. She gave a short laugh. Obviously. Then my security team will take you home. No, the answer came immediately. Viktor didn't move. That wasn't a suggestion, he said calmly. And I didn't ask for protection, Elena replied. The two men standing behind Viktor exchanged a glance. Elena grabbed her bag from the hallway hook and slung it over her shoulder. Thank you for buying the restaurant, she added quickly. But I'm not part of whatever this is. She turned and walked toward the door. Viktor didn't follow. He simply watched her leave. The cold air outside hit Elena's face the moment she stepped onto the sidewalk. The city looked normal. Cars passing. Street lights reflecting on wet pavement. People walking by with their heads down. She exhaled slowly. Maybe Viktor was exaggerating. Maybe this was just the kind of dramatic nonsense rich criminals like to say to make themselves sound important. She started walking toward the subway station 3 blocks away. Her footsteps echoed softly against the quiet street. She had only reached the corner when she heard it, the low growl of an engine behind her. Elena glanced back briefly. A black sedan rolled slowly along the curb. She looked away. Again. Keep walking. The car stayed behind her, not passing, just following. Her stomach tightened. She turned the next corner faster. The sedan followed. The headlights washed over the sidewalk, stretching her shadow across the pavement. Elena stopped walking. The car stopped too. Now her pulse started climbing. This is stupid, she told herself, probably just someone looking for parking. She turned again and started walking toward a different street. But the car rolled forward once more. Elena's heart thumped harder. She reached for her phone in her pocket, pretending to check something while stealing another glance behind her. The sedan's windows were tinted too dark to see inside. Then the rear passenger door opened slightly. Someone inside leaned forward. Elena's breath caught. She didn't wait to see who it was. She started walking faster, heels striking the pavement harder now. The sedan accelerated slowly to keep pace with her. "Hey!" A voice called from the car. Elena ignored it. "Wait!" Her steps turned into a jog now. The car door opened wider, and suddenly another engine roared from the opposite direction. A second vehicle swung around the corner so fast the tires screeched. The black sedan behind her slammed its brakes. Two SUVs blocked the street from both sides. Doors burst open. Men stepped out quickly, dark suits, focused eyes, hands already inside their jackets. Elena froze. One of the men from Victor's restaurant security team stepped forward calmly. "You should leave," he told the men in the sedan. The passenger door of the black car shut slowly, the engine revved. Then the vehicle reversed quickly down the street before turning sharply at the intersection and disappearing. The street fell silent again. Elena stood in the middle of the sidewalk, breathing hard. The security man turned toward her. "Miss Elena," he said. Quietly, she stared at him. "You followed me. Mr. Volkov asked us to. I told him I didn't want protection." The man nodded slightly. "Yes." Another SUV door opened behind him. Victor stepped out. He walked toward her like nothing unusual had just happened. Elena's hands were shaking now. "You planned this?" she demanded. "No," Victor said simply. "Then how did they know where I was?" He looked down the street where the sedan had disappeared. "Because they were watching the restaurant." The realization crawled slowly through her chest. Elena turned back toward him. "So they followed me because you walked out of the building with me standing next to you," Victor finished calmly. She felt the truth settle like ice in her stomach. The fired managers called the car. The men watching her leave. Elena stepped back. "This is insane." Victor's expression didn't change. "Yes," he said. Elena shook her head again, backing away. "Then fix it." "It's already happening," Victor replied. "No," she said. "Fix it so I'm not part of it." Victor walked a little closer now. His voice stayed quiet. "That's not how this works." Elena's pulse pounded harder. "I'm not joining your world." Victor stopped in front of her. The streetlight above them cast long shadows across the wet pavement. He looked directly into her eyes and spoke calmly. "You can't walk away anymore." Elena stared at Victor like the world had suddenly shifted under her feet. The street had gone quiet again. The two SUVs remained parked at the curb, their engines running softly while Victor's security team watched both ends of the block. The normal sounds of the city felt distant now, like they belonged to a different place. Elena shook her head slowly. "No," Victor didn't respond. "No," she repeated louder this time. "I didn't agree to any of this." Her voice cracked slightly, more from anger than fear. "You don't get to tell me I can't walk away." Victor studied her with the same calm expression he had worn all night. "You already tried," he said. Elena gestured down the street where the sedan had disappeared. "That wasn't because of me. That was because of you." "Partly," Victor admitted. The honesty caught her off guard. She folded her arms tightly, trying to slow her breathing. "Then explain it." Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead he glanced toward one of his security men. The man nodded and moved a few steps farther down the street to keep watch. Victor turned back to Elena. "The restaurant wasn't just a restaurant," he said quietly. She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the place you worked in for 3 years was being used for something else." "Like what?" Victor paused just long enough to make the answer heavier. "Money laundering." Elena blinked. "That's not possible." "It is." She shook her head again. The owner was desperate," Victor interrupted calmly. "Medical bills. His nephew, your manager, saw an opportunity." Elena's stomach tightened. She remembered the way the manager had panicked when Victor made that phone call. The sudden change in his voice. The fear in his face. "He was working with another organization," Victor continued. "A rival family." And you just happened to walk in tonight? Elena asked skeptically. No, Victor's voice remained steady. I already knew. The words landed like a quiet explosion. She stared at him. You knew? Yes. Then why were you eating dinner there like a regular customer? Victor gave a small shrug. Observation. Elena's frustration boiled over. Observation. You let me work there for 3 years. I didn't control the place until tonight. He stepped a little closer, lowering his voice. But I was watching it. Elena felt the truth of that settle uncomfortably in her chest. She remembered how Victor had come every Friday. Same time, same table. Always alone. You were investigating them, she said slowly. Victor nodded once. And the manager knew that? Eventually. Elena ran a hand through her hair. So tonight the wine, the argument. Victor finished the thought. You interrupted a transaction. Her heart skipped. What transaction? Cash exchange. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was not. Elena replayed the moment in her mind. The customer grabbing her wrist, the tray tipping, the glass breaking. She looked up sharply. That man at the table was part of it, Victor confirmed quietly. Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine. If I hadn't spilled the wine, the exchange would have happened without interruption, Victor said. Elena looked down the empty street again, suddenly aware of how exposed it felt. So the manager fired me because you disrupted something illegal, Victor finished. She swallowed hard. But that doesn't mean they think I saw anything. Victor didn't answer right away. That silence was worse. Elena's chest tightened. Do they? She asked quietly. Victor watched her for a moment before replying. They don't know. Then why would they? Because people in that world don't take chances. The cold certainty in his voice made the situation finally feel real. Elena felt the ground slipping out from under her calm. So they're just going to assume I know something? Yes. Even if I don't. Especially if you don't. She laughed once, but the sound came out hollow. That's insane. It's efficient. Elena's hands trembled slightly now. She turned away, pacing 2 steps across the sidewalk before stopping again. I'll go to the police. Victor's expression didn't change. You can try. Try, she snapped. The investigation into that restaurant already involved the police, Victor said quietly. Elena froze. She turned back slowly. What? You weren't the only one watching that place. A new kind of fear slid into her chest now. So if I walk into a police station and tell them what happened tonight, they will ask questions, Victor said calmly. And the rival family will know you're talking. The streetlight buzzed faintly above them. Elena realized there was no direction she could turn that didn't lead somewhere dangerous. She felt suddenly very small standing there in the middle of the city. This can't be real, she whispered. Victor's voice softened slightly, though the words themselves didn't. It is. Elena looked up at him again. So what happens now? For the first time since the conversation began, Victor hesitated. Then he spoke quietly. Now they decide if you're a risk. Elena's throat went dry. And if they think I am? Victor's eyes didn't leave hers when he answered. They will kill you before sunrise. Elena didn't speak for several seconds after Victor finished. The streetlight above them buzzed faintly. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, then faded into the night. The city was still moving, still alive, but everything around her felt suspended. She shook her head slowly. No, Victor waited. She started walking. The motion was sudden, desperate. She pushed past him toward the corner as if distance alone could undo what he had just told her. Victor didn't grab her. He didn't shout. He simply turned and followed at the same steady pace. Elena reached the subway entrance 2 blocks away. The metal stairs leading underground looked like escape. She descended halfway before Victor's voice reached her. They'll be watching the stations. She stopped, her hand tightened on the rail. You don't know that. Yes, Victor said calmly behind her. I do. Elena turned back slowly. You're trying to scare me. No, he stepped down 1 stair closer to her. I'm trying to keep you alive. She stared at him, breathing harder now. You don't get to control where I go. I don't want to. Then stop following me. Victor studied her for a moment before speaking again. Where are you planning to go? The question caught her off guard. Anywhere. Anywhere where? He pressed. Elena opened her mouth, but the answer stalled in her throat. Her apartment. The subway. The bus station. None of those places suddenly felt safe. She climbed back up the stairs slowly and stepped onto the sidewalk again. Victor followed but kept a few feet of distance. I'll leave the city, she said suddenly. Tonight. Victor tilted his head slightly. And go where? It doesn't matter. It does, he replied. Elena ran a hand through her hair, frustration building. I'll take a train. Bus. I'll disappear. Disappear where people are already looking for you? He asked quietly. She stopped walking again. Victor continued in the same calm voice. The men who followed you tonight will report back. They saw your face. Elena clenched her jaw. Then I'll change cities. That takes time. I'll manage. You won't make it to the station. His certainty snapped her patience. Stop saying that. It's the truth. Elena spun toward him. You don't know that. Victor's expression hardened just slightly. I know how these people work. For a moment neither of them spoke. The wind shifted down the street, carrying the smell of rain. Elena felt trapped between anger and fear. So what? She said finally. I'm supposed to just stand next to you forever? No. Victor reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone again. He glanced at something briefly before putting it away. You have another option. Elena crossed her arms. I'm listening. Victor stepped closer but kept his voice low. Work for me. She stared at him. You can't be serious. Temporarily, he added. Elena laughed in disbelief. You think I'm joining your organization? No. His tone stayed calm. You'll help rebuild the restaurant. That's the same restaurant that just turned my life into a crime scene. Yes. Elena shook her head. Why would I ever agree to that? Because my protection remains active while you're working with me. She frowned. And if I refuse? Victor didn't answer immediately. He simply looked down the street toward the dark intersections before returning his gaze to her. When he finally spoke, his voice remained steady. Then my protection ends. Elena blinked. That's a threat. No, Victor said quietly. It's reality. She studied his face, searching for manipulation. But there was none in his expression. Just calm honesty that somehow made it worse. You're basically saying the only safe place for me is standing next to you. For now. Elena exhaled sharply, pacing a few steps across the sidewalk. This is insane. Yes. I had a normal life an hour ago. That changed. Because of you. Victor didn't argue with that. She stopped pacing and looked at him again. How long? He understood the question immediately. Until the situation settles. Weeks. Possibly. Months. Maybe. Elena's chest tightened. And what happens when it's over? You walk away. Just like that. Yes. She searched his eyes again. You expect me to believe that? No, Victor said quietly. But it will still be true. The wind picked up slightly. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. She thought about the black sedan, the men watching her leave the restaurant, the quiet certainty in Victor's voice when he said they would kill her before sunrise. She hated that the situation made sense, hated that logic pointed only one direction. This isn't fair, she muttered. No, Victor agreed. They stood there in silence again. Finally Elena closed her eyes briefly when she opened them. The resistance in her expression had shifted into reluctant acceptance. She looked straight at him. Temporary, she said. Victor nodded once. Temporary. Elena exhaled slowly. Fine. The word felt heavier than it should have. She hated saying it, but she said it anyway. I'll help rebuild the restaurant. Victor studied her carefully. You're sure? She gave a bitter half-smile. No, then she added quietly. But I don't think I have a choice. The next morning Elena stood in front of the restaurant doors with a feeling she couldn't quite name. The sign still read the same. Bellinade. The same place she had walked into hundreds of times before, the same place where she knew every corner of the kitchen, every scratch on the floor tiles, every loose hinge on the swinging door. But it didn't feel the same anymore. The street outside looked different now. Two men leaned against a parked SUV across the street pretending to scroll through their phones. Another man stood near the entrance of a coffee shop across the intersection. Elena noticed the small communication earpiece in his ear the moment she looked closer. She turned toward Victor, who stood beside her adjusting the cuff of his black coat. "Your people?" she asked. Victor followed her gaze briefly. "Some of them." Elena frowned. "Some. Others belong to people who would prefer I fail." That didn't make her feel better. She pushed open the restaurant door and stepped inside. The interior looked exactly the same as yesterday. Tables neatly arranged. The faint smell of garlic and roasted tomatoes lingering in the air. Sunlight stretching through the front windows across the polished wooden floor. But the staff looked different. They weren't relaxed. Chef Antonio stood near the kitchen door speaking quietly with one of the servers. When they noticed Victor entering, their conversation stopped instantly. Elena felt the tension ripple through the room. Victor walked past them like it was just another morning. "We open in 3 hours," he said calmly. "Let's make sure we're ready." Elena blinked. "You expect normal service today?" "Yes. After last night." Victor shrugged slightly. "People still need to eat." That logic was strangely hard to argue with. Elena moved behind the bar counter and opened the inventory ledger she used to check supplies. The routine motions helped calm her nerves slightly. But the strange feeling didn't disappear. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The man in the booth near the window who hadn't ordered anything yet still hadn't left. The same gray sedan that drove past the building 3 times in 20 minutes. The police cruiser parked half a block away that never seemed to move. She leaned toward Victor, who was reviewing a folder of documents near the counter. "Tell me something honestly." "I usually do," he replied without looking up. "Is this place under surveillance?" Victor closed the folder slowly and glanced toward the front windows. "Yes." Elena sighed. "By who?" "Everyone." The single word carried more weight than a long explanation. She looked back toward the street again. "Police?" "Yes." "Rival gangs?" "Yes." "Your people?" "Yes." Elena shook her head slowly. "So this restaurant is basically a war zone now." "A quiet one," Victor corrected. The staff moved around them preparing tables and polishing glasses, but Elena could feel their nervous energy building. She leaned closer to Victor again. "You said the laundering operation was happening through here." "It was." "Which means someone inside helped them." Victor nodded once. "Most likely." The realization crept slowly through Elena's chest. She looked around the dining room again. Everyone suddenly felt suspicious, Marco the headwaiter counting wine glasses too carefully. The new hostess nervously adjusting the reservation book. The dishwasher moving in and out of the kitchen door without making eye contact. Elena exhaled slowly. So one of them could still be working for the rival family. Possibly. That word made the room feel colder. Elena turned away and walked toward the small office behind the kitchen. The office had always been cramped. Just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a security monitor mounted near the wall. She closed the door behind her and sat down. The computer flickered to life when she pressed the power button. She began checking supplier orders and invoices, trying to focus on something normal. But something caught her attention, a thin black wire running along the underside of the desk. She frowned. That wire hadn't been there before. Elena crouched down and followed it with her fingers. IT disappeared behind the filing cabinet. She pulled the cabinet slightly aside. A small rectangular device was taped to the wall behind it. Her heart skipped. IT wasn't part of the restaurant equipment. She leaned closer. A tiny blinking light glowed faintly red. Elena felt her pulse climb. She grabbed the device carefully and turned it over. A microphone, recording device. She stood up quickly and opened the office door. "Victor." He appeared in the hallway almost immediately, like he had been waiting. She held the device up. "Found this." Victor stepped inside and examined it quietly. His expression darkened slightly, but not with surprise. "How long has that been there?" Elena asked. "Long enough." "Meaning?" Victor turned the device over in his hand. Meaning someone inside the restaurant placed it. The words made the room feel suddenly smaller. Elena looked back toward the dining room where the staff continued working, unaware of the discovery. "You're saying one of them is spying?" Victor met her eyes. "Yes." Elena's stomach tightened. "And whoever planted this?" She stopped speaking when a quiet sound came from the hallway outside. The faint creak of a floorboard. Victor's head turned slowly toward the door. Elena followed his gaze. The hallway was empty, but the office door had been slightly open, and someone had been listening. Closing time usually came quietly. The last customers finished their desserts. Chairs scraped against the floor as tables were cleared. The kitchen noise faded into the clatter of dishes being washed. For years Elena had loved this moment. The calm after the chaos. The small satisfaction of knowing another shift was done. But tonight the quiet felt wrong. The discovery of the recording device had changed everything. No one had confessed. No one had been caught. But everyone inside the restaurant now moved with careful tension like people walking across thin ice. Elena wiped the last table near the front window and glanced outside again. The same gray sedan was parked across the street. The same man stood near the bus stop pretending to scroll through his phone. She looked away quickly. Victor had left 2 hours earlier to meet someone across the city. But 2 of his security men remained stationed outside the restaurant doors watching the street. Marco approached her carrying a stack of menus. "You think we'll ever go back to normal?" he asked quietly. Elena forced a small smile. "Probably not." Marco nodded like he already knew that. The last customer stepped outside a few minutes later and the door closed behind him. The restaurant was officially empty. Chef Antonio shouted from the kitchen that he was shutting down the ovens. Elena grabbed the ledger from the bar and walked toward the office to finish the nightly inventory. But halfway across the dining room she heard something, a car engine accelerating too fast. She glanced toward the window just as the gray sedan across the street suddenly sped forward. Headlights flooded the front of the restaurant. Elena froze. Then the first gunshot shattered the night. The front window exploded inward. Screams erupted from the kitchen. Marco dropped the menus and dove behind the bar. Elena's ears rang as glass rained across the floor. Another gunshot cracked through the air. Then another. "Down!" One of Victor's security men shouted from the entrance. Elena threw herself behind a table just as a bullet punched through the wall behind her. The calm restaurant turned into chaos instantly. More cars screeched to a halt outside, doors slammed, men shouting. Elena crawled across the floor toward the bar where Marco was already hiding. "What is happening?" he gasped. Elena didn't answer. She knew exactly what was happening. The rival family had decided to stop watching and start attacking. Another burst of gunfire ripped through the front window. The security guards returned fire from the doorway. The sound was deafening. Elena pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't block the violence exploding around them. Tires screeched again outside. Then another engine roared down the street. A black SUV slid to a stop sideways in front of the restaurant door. More doors burst open. Familiar voices shouted commands. Victor stepped out of the vehicle. His coat was already off. A handgun gripped calmly in his hand. Elena had never seen him like this before. Not the quiet customer from table 7, not the calm man who bought a restaurant with a phone call. This Victor moved differently. Faster. Sharper. His security team spread across the street with practiced precision. Victor stepped forward into the gunfire like the chaos belonged to him. One of the attackers ran from behind the sedan raising his weapon. Victor fired once. The man dropped instantly. The street echoed with more shots as the rival gang realized their ambush had failed. They retreated toward their vehicles, but Victor's men were already blocking the exits. One attacker tried to sprint toward the alley beside the restaurant. Victor grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the hood of a car. Elena watched through the shattered window, unable to move. The scene outside looked like something from a nightmare. Victor's calm face illuminated by flashing headlights. Guns raised, men shouting. The attacker struggled, but Victor pinned him easily. "Who sent you?" Victor asked quietly. The man spat blood onto the pavement. Victor didn't flinch. Elena couldn't hear the rest of the words over the ringing in her ears, but the tension in the street made the answer obvious. The attackers had been sent for him. But the bullets had ripped through her workplace, her world. One of Victor's men shouted something from down the street. The remaining attackers jumped into their car and sped away, tires screaming across the wet pavement. The gunfire stopped, the silence afterward felt heavier than the noise. Elena slowly stood behind the bar. The restaurant looked destroyed, glass everywhere. Bullet holes punched through the walls, tables overturned. She stepped carefully toward the shattered window. Victor stood in the middle of the street, now speaking quietly to one of his guards like the violence had been just another conversation. He looked up when he noticed her watching. For a moment neither of them spoke. Elena felt the final illusion disappear. The normal life she had clung to. The idea that she could stay close to Victor without becoming part of his world. It was gone now. She looked down at the shattered glass beneath her shoes, then back at the armed men outside, and realized the truth. She wasn't just caught in Victor's world anymore. She was standing in the middle of it. The broken glass crunched under Elena's shoes as she stepped through the front doorway of the restaurant. The night air smelled like burned rubber and gunpowder. Police sirens were approaching in the distance now, still several blocks away but getting closer. Victor stood near the curb speaking quietly to one of his men while the rest of his security team checked the street for any remaining attackers. The rival gang's car had disappeared into the darkness minutes ago, leaving only the damage behind. Elena walked toward him before she could talk herself out of it. Her pulse was still racing, but the fear had hardened into something sharper. She stopped a few feet away. Victor noticed immediately and dismissed the guard with a small gesture. The man stepped away without question. For a moment they just looked at each other. The flashing emergency lights reflecting faintly off the wet pavement made the entire street feel unreal. Elena broke the silence first. "You knew this was coming." Victor didn't answer. That was answer enough. She shook her head slowly. "You bought that restaurant knowing it would turn into a battlefield." His expression remained calm, but his eyes had changed slightly, darker now in the flashing light. "I suspected it might." Elena let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but without humor. "That's not good enough." Victor waited. Elena stepped closer. "Why that place?" she demanded. "Why that restaurant?" Victor glanced toward the shattered window behind her where Bellinate stood wounded under the streetlights. The question seemed to weigh something in his mind before he finally answered. "Because it mattered." Elena frowned. "Restaurants matter to a lot of people. That doesn't explain why you walked into one already tied to a rival family's operation." Victor didn't look at her immediately. His gaze drifted across the quiet street, past the parked cars, past the broken glass, somewhere far beyond the present moment. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed. "Softer. When I was a child my mother owned a place like that." Elena blinked. The sudden shift in his tone caught her off guard. Victor continued before she could interrupt. "Small restaurant. Nothing famous. Just good food. People from the neighborhood came every night." His eyes returned to Bellinate's broken windows. It smelled the same as that kitchen. Garlic, tomato sauce, fresh bread. Elena stayed silent. Victor's voice remained steady, but something deeper moved beneath the calm. "My father died when I was 12. After that the restaurant was everything my mother had left." He paused briefly. "Until they came." Elena felt the meaning before he said the words. "The same family." Victor nodded once. "They demanded protection money." Elena's chest tightened. She had heard stories like that before, but hearing it from him felt different. More real. "Your mother refused," she said quietly. Victor's expression didn't change, but the answer was clear. 3 nights later they burned the place down. The image formed instantly in Elena's mind. Flames devouring the building. Smoke swallowing the kitchen that once smelled like home. Victor continued speaking in the same quiet voice. "My mother tried to rebuild. She worked 3 jobs after that. But the restaurant was gone." He looked down the street again. 2 years later she died. Elena swallowed. "I'm sorry." Victor didn't acknowledge the sympathy. Instead he looked back at Bellinate. "When I first walked into that place 2 years ago, it reminded me of her restaurant." Elena realized what he meant instantly. The same smell. The same atmosphere. The same kind of small family business. So you kept coming every Friday, she said slowly. Victor nodded. At first I was just remembering. Then his eyes hardened slightly. Then I realized who owned the operation running through the place. Elena exhaled slowly as the pieces came together. The same family that destroyed your mother's restaurant. Yes. The word landed heavily between them. Elena looked back at the building again. So buying Bella Notte wasn't about saving the restaurant. Victor met her eyes. No, it was revenge. Victor didn't deny it. Elena felt the realization settle deeper. You wanted them to show themselves. Yes. And tonight. She glanced toward the street where the ambush had started. They did. Victor nodded once. The sirens were closer now. Red and blue light flickered across the buildings. Elena crossed her arms slowly. You already suspected someone inside the restaurant was helping them. Correct. She remembered the recording device hidden in the office wall. The quiet footsteps in the hallway outside the door. Elena's eyes widened slightly as another realization formed. Victor watched her expression change. You figured it out, he said quietly. Elena turned toward the restaurant again, her mind racing. The person who planted the microphone. The person listening outside the office. The person who knew exactly when Victor would be inside the building tonight. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. The traitor. Victor didn't interrupt. Elena's pulse quickened as the final piece snapped into place. I know who it is. Elena didn't answer immediately. The flashing police lights finally reached the end of the street. Patrol cars slowed as officers stepped out cautiously, already talking to Victor's men and surveying the damage. But Elena's attention stayed fixed on the restaurant behind her and the realization forming in her mind. Marco, she said quietly. Victor's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. Explain. Elena turned fully toward the broken front windows of Bella Notte. Through the shattered glass she could see the overturned chairs and the long counter where Marco had been standing earlier that night. He was the only one who knew everything, she said slowly. The inventory schedules. The cash deliveries. The nights you visited. Victor watched her carefully. Elena continued thinking out loud now, piecing together every detail from the last 24 hours. When we found the recording device in the office, someone was listening outside the door. She looked back at Victor. Marco was the only one missing from the dining room at that moment. The silence between them deepened. Victor nodded once to one of his men across the street. The guard immediately moved toward the restaurant entrance with two others. Elena followed a few steps behind but stopped near the doorway. She didn't want to see it happen. But she couldn't look away either. The guards moved through the dining room quickly. Within seconds raised voices echoed from the kitchen. Elena heard Marco protesting. What is this? He shouted. You can't just grab me like that. The guards dragged him back into the dining room. Elena saw the fear in his face the moment he noticed Victor standing outside. Marco's eyes darted toward the street like he was calculating escape routes, but the police cars had already blocked both directions. You're making a mistake, Marco said quickly. I've worked here 5 years. Victor stepped forward calmly. Yes, he replied. Marco's voice grew desperate. I didn't do anything. Victor held up the small surveillance device Elena had found earlier. Marco's expression collapsed in an instant. The denial vanished. He tried to run anyway. One of the guards grabbed him before he could reach the door. Victor didn't raise his voice. Who are you working for? Marco stayed silent for several seconds, then the fight drained from his shoulders. They said it was just business, he muttered. The answer was enough. Victor nodded once to his men. Marco was led toward one of the SUVs parked down the street. Elena watched him disappear inside without another word. The police officers nearby pretended not to notice what was happening. They focused on the shattered windows and the bullet holes in the walls instead. The war had its own rules, and everyone on that street seemed to understand them. The next few days passed like a blur. Work crews replaced the broken windows. Security cameras appeared at every corner of the building. Victor's guards rotated shifts outside the entrance day and night. The restaurant reopened within a week. Customers returned cautiously at first. But the food was still good. And the name Bella Notte still meant something to the neighborhood. Elena stood behind the bar that first night back, watching the room fill with familiar faces. She moved through the tables the way she always had, taking orders, carrying plates, offering polite smiles, but everything felt different now. The street outside never looked empty anymore. Somewhere nearby Victor's men were always watching, and she knew exactly why. The rival family had lost their spy. They had lost their laundering operation. They had lost the ambush, but the war itself wasn't over. It never really was. Late that night after the final customers left, the restaurant finally fell quiet again. The kitchen lights dimmed, the chairs were stacked. The same table near the corner where Victor used to sit alone waited under the soft glow of the ceiling lamp. Elena sat down across from him. He poured 2 glasses of wine from the bottle left behind after dinner service. For a moment neither of them spoke. Elena looked around the room slowly. This place used to be simple, a job, a routine. Now it was something else entirely, a place that belonged to Victor's world. Victor studied her quietly. "Do you still wish you walked away that night?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Elena thought about the moment she had stepped out of the restaurant hours after losing her job, the black sedan following her down the street, the gunshots, the chaos, the truth she never expected to uncover. She looked around Bella Notte again. The same tables, the same kitchen, the same smell of garlic and bread. But none of it felt like the life she had before. She met Victor's eyes again, her voice was soft but certain. "I think that night decided for me." Victor didn't argue with that, he simply raised his glass slightly before taking a quiet sip. Elena did the same. The restaurant sat in peaceful silence for the first time since everything had begun. But Elena knew the calm wouldn't last. It never did. Some doors close when you walk through them. Others lock behind you forever.